Welcome to our daily reading from the New Testament book of the Acts of the Apostles. We read this book in church in the weeks following Easter. As we can't be together to do that at the moment, we decided to share it online. Acts tells us how the early church sought to live out a new era opened up by the resurrection of Jesus, and how they shared the good news of what that had happened. Today, we hear about Paul's voyage to Rome, including a shipwreck. So I invite you to continue on that journey with us as we read Acts chapter 27. When it was decided that we should sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius of the Augustan cohort. We embarked on a ship of Arboretum, bound for ports in the province of Asia, and put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, came with us. Next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius very considerately allowed Paul to go to his friends to be cared for. Leaving Sidon, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because of the headwinds, then across the open sea off the coast of Syria and Pamphylia, and so reached Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian vessel bound for Italy and put us on board. For a good many days we made little headway, and we were hard put to it to reach Cnidus. Then, as the wind continued against us off Salmone, we began to sail under the lee of Crete, and hugging the coast, struggled on to a place called Fair Havens, not far from the town of Lasea. By now, much time had been lost, and with the fast already over, it was dangerous to go on with the voyage. So Paul gave them this warning: I can see, gentlemen, that this voyage will be disastrous. It will mean heavy loss, not only of ship and cargo, but also of life. But the centurion paid more attention to the captain and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And as the harbour was unsuitable for wintering, the majority were in favour of putting to sea, hoping, if they could get so far, to winter as to Phoenix, a Cretan harbour facing southwest and northwest. When a southerly breeze sprang up, they thought that their purpose was good as achieved. And weighing anchor, they sailed along the coast of Crete, hugging the land. But before very long, a violent wind, a northeaster as they called it, swept down from the landward side. It caught the ship, and as it was impossible to keep head to wind, we had to give way and run before it. As we passed under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with a struggle to get the ship's boat under control. When they had hoisted it on board, they made use of tackle to brace the ship. Then, afraid of running onto the sandbanks of Sirius, they put out a sea anchor and let her drift. Next day, as we were making very heavy weather, they began to lighten the ship. And on the third day, they jettisoned the ship's gear with their own hands. For days on end, there was no sign of either sun nor stars. The storm was raging and abated, and our last hopes of coming through alive began to fade. When they had gone for a long time without food, Paul stood up among them and said, You should have taken my advice, gentlemen, not to put out from Crete. Then you would have avoided this damage and loss. But now I urge you not to lose heart. Not a single life will be lost, only the ship. Last night there stood by me an angel of the God whose I am and whom I worship. Do not be afraid, Paul, he said. It is ordained that you shall appear before Caesar, and be assured God has granted you the lives of all who are sailing with you. So take heart, men. I trust God. It will turn out as I have been told. We are to be cast ashore on an island. The 14th night came, and we were still drifting in the Adriatic Sea. At midnight, the sailors felt that land was getting nearer, so they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. Sounding again after a short interval, they found 15 fathoms. Then, fearing that we might be cast ashore on a rugged coast, they let go four anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight to come. The sailors tried to abandon ship. They had already lowered the ship's boat, pretending they were going to lay out anchors from the bows. When Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay on board, you cannot reach safety." At that, the soldiers cut the ropes of the boat and let it drop away. Shortly before daybreak, Paul urged them all to take some food. For the last 14 days, he said, you have lived in suspense and gone hungry. You have eaten nothing. So have something to eat, I beg you. Your lives depend on it. Remember, not a hair of your heads will be lost. With these words, he took bread, gave thanks to God in front of them all, broke it, and began eating. Then they plucked up courage and began to take food themselves. All told, there were on board 276 of us. After they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by dumping the grain into the sea. When day broke, they did not recognize the land, but they sighted a bay with a sandy beach, on which they decided, if possible, to run ashore. So they slipped the anchors and let them go. At the same time, they loosened the lashings of the steering paddles, set the foresail to the wind, and let it drive to the beach. But they found themselves caught between cross currents and ran the ship aground, so that the bow stuck fast and remained immovable, while the stern was being pounded to pieces by the breakers. The soldiers thought that they had better kill the prisoners for fear that any should swim away and escape. But the centurion was determined to bring Paul safely through and prevented them from carrying out their plan. He gave orders that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. The rest to follow, some on planks, some on parts of the ship. And thus it was that all came safely to land.